Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 765 for April 28th, 2019. Coming up in a few minutes.
Everyone knew that I was not going to be like Jimmy Russell. I'm not going to be there when I'm, very, very old, because I have other things in my plan, and that was my family.
It seems like only yesterday that Pam Heilmann took over for Willie Pratt as the Master Distiller at Michter's Distillery in the Louisville suburb of Shively, Kentucky. In whiskey terms, it really was only yesterday. That was back in the fall of 2016, just a couple of years after she left Beam Suntory to join Michter's. Pam is retiring this week, and her hand-picked successor followed her over from Beam. We'll talk with Pam and newly promoted Master Distiller Dan McKee later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and on Behind the Label, we'll answer a listener's question about starting a whiskey club with help from one of the leaders of a very successful club, Andre Girard of the Quebec Whiskey Club, which recently celebrated its 10th anniversary. It's all just ahead on this edition of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's start with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. And we'll start in the bourbon capital of the world, Bardstown, Kentucky, where the Bardstown Bourbon Company is barely 3 years old and has already expanded its production capacity twice. It started out at 1.5 million proof gallons a year and is now running full steam at 6.8 million proof gallons annually. But that's not important right now. What is important is that the first bourbon from that distillery is finally in a bottle. Bardstown Bourbon's Fusion Series No. 1 blends 60% of the distillery's own 2-year-old whiskeys with an older 11-year-old sourced bourbon. Specifically, 42% comes from a high rye bourbon mash bill that's 2 years and a month old, with the other 18% from a wheat-based mash bill that's 2 years and 3 months old. Master Distiller Steve Nally told us it took a lot of work to come up with that specific blend.
We got into a really in-depth process to select that. We not only included myself and John and Nick, the distilling team, we brought into the process the bartenders, mixologists, even management and the kitchen staff. They got involved in it. We had about 12 to 15 people involved in the process. We made up about 52 different fusion mash bills or recipes, and we went through a process. We tasted about 6 or 7 a day for a few weeks. We narrowed the numbers down to 6, and we went in and did a blind tasting with those 6. And in that 52 that we started with, there was actually some known brands that are on the shelf that was put into that mix to compare to. And unanimously, we selected those 6, and then we went into a final round and narrowed it down to 1. So, it's quite a process to get. And we have some rye whiskey we made, some rye bourbon, and some wheat bourbon. And we also put in some products that we have purchased, aged products. And it came out that we ended up, one that was selected actually contained 60% of our product, which is a combination of wheat and rye. And I think that's probably one of the higher percentages that anybody on the market. Most of them use 15, 20, 30%. And the product that we use that's ours is 2.5 years old. And it's a pretty neat product.
Fusion Series number 1 is available now at the distillery's shop in Bardstown and will go on sale this week elsewhere in Kentucky at first, before gradually becoming available in other states. There's also a new Discovery Series that blends sourced bourbons 5 to 13 years old, and the new Pfeiffer Pavitt Reserve Edition that takes 9-year-old Tennessee bourbon and finishes it in Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks from California's Pfeiffer Pavitt Vineyards. In other news, production has officially begun at Arran's new Lagg Distillery. The first cask was filled earlier this month and will eventually be bottled for members of the Lagg Cask Society. There is still construction work going on at the distillery site, though, with the hope of having the visitors center ready in time for the Arran Malt and Music Festival this summer. Diageo has unveiled plans for the fourth of its regional brand homes for Johnnie Walker. This one will be on Isla at Kalila Distillery, and work is expected to begin after the Isla Festival on an expansion to the existing Visitors Center. It'll be thematically linked to the Johnnie Walker experience that's planned for the old House of Fraser department store building on George's Street in downtown Edinburgh, and the other 3 regional brand homes at Cardhu, Glenkinchie, and Clynelish distilleries. The work at all 5 projects is expected to be completed in time for the brand's 200th anniversary next year. Gordon and MacPhail is kicking off what it is calling a spring collection of single malt releases, starting off with a 38-year-old cask of Colburn, filled back in 1981. It's the latest addition to Gordon and MacPhail's private collection range and will carry a recommended retail price of £1,250. That's about $1,615 at current exchange rates. The spring collection also includes 2 new Connoisseur's Choice bottlings, a 1998 Glenbergie and a 2006 Lecheg. And Gordon and MacPhail's Ben Romack Distillery has released batch number 1 of its new cask strength vintage 2008 single malt. It'll replace the old Ben Romack 100 degrees proof and will be available in select global markets with a recommended retail price of £69.95. That's around $90 a bottle. However, this one will not be coming to the U.S. or China. Both markets will be getting their own exclusive cask-strength vintage bottlings later this year. Chivas Brothers is giving the Glenlivet's Master Distiller's Reserve a major change. It's being renamed the Distiller's Reserve and will become a triple cask malt using ex-sherry, European oak, and American oak casks. It'll form the basis for a new triple cask series for the travel retail market. The Glenlivet's Solera Vatted is being replaced with the new White Oak Reserve, which will emphasize first fill American oak ex-bourbon casks, and the Glenlivet Rare Cask will be a small batch limited edition range. Pricing will vary by market, but should range from around $50 for the Distiller's Reserve to around $115 for the Rare Cask. Also in travel retail, Bacardi's John Dewar & Sons is launching an exclusive Altmore wine cask series in the World of Whiskies shops at Heathrow Airport in London. The 3 whiskies are all 22 years old and were finished for 11 years in either Super Tuscan, Muscatel, or Chateauneuf de Pape wine casks. Pricing ranges from £320, around $415, for the Muscatel edition, to £360, that's about $465, for the Super Tuscan edition. And the Irish Whiskey Collection shop in Dublin's airport has an exclusive cask of the new Writer's Tears Marsala cask finish. It's one of 5 casks Walsh Whiskey has bottled of the Marsala cask expression. Dublin's Celtic Whiskey shop has its own cask, while a third was bottled for sale throughout Ireland. The 4th cask is heading for Australia. And that 5th cask? No word yet on where that one is heading. We'll keep you posted as we get more details. Tamdhu has released its latest single cask bottling, a 15-year-old Oloroso sherry butt picked by distillery manager Sandy McIntyre. Only 595 bottles are available through the distillery's website at a price tag of £250 each. That's around $323 at today's exchange rates. The Last Drop Distillers has released a 1969 Glenrothes. That's the second in a 3-bottle series that follows last year's 1968 Glenrothes. This one comes from 2 ex-bourbon casks, both filled on October 27, 1968. Each one was bottled separately, with one producing 130 bottles and the other 141. They're both priced the same, though, $6,250 each. And Kentucky's Wilderness Trail Distillery has released its latest whiskey, a small batch bottled in bond bourbon. The release came during the distillery's annual A Taste in Danville Festival on Saturday. It's the 3rd release from Wilderness Trail, following the single-barrel bottled in bond bourbon and their rye whiskey. On that note, we talked with Joyce and Autumn Nethery of Jephthah Creed Distillery a couple of months ago in episode 756. They've now confirmed that their new straight bourbon made from Bloody Butcher corn will go on sale May 10th at the distillery in Shelbyville, Kentucky. It'll also be part of a larger event that day, one of the distillery's Jammin' with Jephthah parties. The Netherys are part of a growing number of distillers who grow their own grains, but not every craft distiller has access to farmland. That's where Robert McDonald of Dancing Star Farm in Ambler, Pennsylvania comes in. He's growing heirloom varieties of corn and other grains for craft distillers. I sat down with him recently at the American Whiskey Convention before he hit the fields for spring planting.
I grew Bloody Butcher, Wapsie Valley, Octagon Green. There's a blue heirloom corn. I've got a new one coming. It is Argentinian Yellow Creole. I've got a heirloom corn from Alan Bishop in the state of Indiana, the Amanda Palmer.
How hard is it to grow these heirloom corns compared to the standard stuff you'd get at the seed store?
Well, everything is non-GMO, so you can't use Roundup on it. It'll actually kill your corn. It's like a old-style conventional corn.
Which means, for those of us who aren't agriculture-oriented,
you basically can use any kind of chemical that's out there other than Roundup. It's the old school, like things used to be 50 years ago.
Is it more weather dependent as well? You've got to have the right amount of rain as opposed to the current modern corns?
Actually, it's very flexible on your weather. It's like it still needs your typical amount of rain that any other corn would do, but your yield is less, which makes it a more costly crop to grow.
Tell me about how business has been for you, because this boom in craft distilling has created a demand for these heirloom grains.
This will be my 3rd year. The first year I was just kind of getting my feet wet, but this is my 3rd year now, and I can't keep enough supply for the distilleries. They're buying me out.
Before you put a seed in the field, you've already got it sold, right?
Yeah, basically.
How far away are distilleries contacting you? How much demand have you gotten?
I've got distilleries in New York, all throughout Pennsylvania, West Virginia. I've sent some to Missouri already. pretty much any place east of the Mississippi.
Tell me about the flavor difference that these heirloom grains give to a whiskey when it's distilled, because we know that most bourbons, the commercial bourbons, use number 2 yellow dent corn, the same standard stuff you find in frozen corn and canned corn and stuff like that, which is sweet but doesn't have a whole lot of flavor to it. But there's Bloody Butcher corn that you mentioned that has a lot of flavor to it.
I'll put it to you this way. It's like driving a Volkswagen to a Mercedes. There's no comparison on the flavor.
The problem is it's just more economically viable to grow the Volkswagen, or the Volkswagen of corn.
Yeah.
Where do you see this business going over the next few years?
I think the sky's the limit. You know, the younger generation wants something that's grown local, and you know that's what's making the local craft distilleries such a booming business. You know, they can buy local.
That's Robert McDonald of Dancing Star Farm in Ambler, Pennsylvania. We'll keep in touch with him from time to time this summer as his crops are growing. Now, farmers in North America produce a lot of food, but there is still a major problem with food insecurity. That's the technical term for what we'd call going hungry. A couple of years ago, the Edmonton Scotch Club in Canada started holding a Drams for Fams whiskey tasting each May to raise money for their local food bank. Last year, they challenged other whiskey clubs to join them to support other local food banks. The gang in Edmonton held their Drams for Fams event this weekend, and Travis Watt says 13 other clubs around North America have signed on to join them this year.
We have the Austin Scotch Lovers down in Austin, Texas, Scotchology in Minnesota. I'm sure you've heard of a bunch of these clubs. The Whiskey Consultant, AJ, in Grimsby, Ontario. The Saratoga Springs Whiskey Club in New York. The North Shore Whiskey Club in Boston. The Tampa Bay Whiskey Society. There's a new one. It's called the Louisiana chapter of the Edmonton Scotch Club. They got a big one they're working on. Pittsburgh Whiskey Friends in Pennsylvania. The We Rock Whiskey Club, and a couple other anonymous ones. And we also got a Sherwood Park Whiskey Society here just on the suburbs of Edmonton. So it's growing, and it's really cool to see clubs jumping on board here.
And unfortunately, the need is growing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the need, I got chatted with the food bank people just recently, and I know locally, you know, they have their big times of the year where they get a lot of donations, usually around Christmas time, stuff like that. But right around now is actually when their hampers start to get really dry, and they're having troubles just getting food out. So we choose to donate the money, because the money for the food bank means that they can go out and buy what they want, and they can also buy it at a much better price than we can. So they could probably get for $1 what we could buy for $3, if not even, you know, better than that. So they are always in need, but now seems to be a rough time for them because the Christmas season's over, and people still need to eat.
And that's the same pretty much all over the place. I know food banks all over the world have this problem during the summer. Is people just don't think about it, and the need is still there, of course.
The main reason we chose this charity, Mark, was when we started to think about what was a charity that we could support that would affect, you know, the most amount of people in our club. Everyone has charities that are important to them. You know, we have the Children's Hospital and the Cancer Societies, but one stat that we heard that made us really want to choose the food bank was 40% of their users are children under the age of 18, and the average age of our club is probably 35 to 45 years old, and we're all having children now, and I don't think any child should ever go without food. And most of these food banks have ties to school programs as well, so that they can feed kids while they're at school. So, and here's the crazy stat, Mark. I just got this one from the food bank. So last year we raised over $17,000 for the food bank, and what is the total? That helped provide meals for 52,248 meals, just at $17,000. So the money goes a long way with these food banks, and that really impresses me.
A quick update. The guys say they've raised around $20,000 this weekend alone from their Drams for Fams events. If you'd like more information or want to hold a Drams for Fams event in your community, we've included a link to the Drams for Fams website in our show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Of course, that's also where you can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Keeping American whiskey history and tradition alive isn't just a marketing slogan, it's part of Heaven Hill's fabric. When other distillers were getting out of the rye whiskey business, Heaven Hill saved the legendary Rittenhouse rye from becoming a footnote in the history books. Today it's the rye whiskey of choice, in a cocktail or neat, with a distinct spicy flavor all its own. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Of course, the big event this week is the Spirit of Speyside Festival, with events all over Scotland's Speyside region. It starts on Wednesday and goes through next Monday. The Harlem Whiskey Renaissance is Friday night in New York City, followed on Saturday by the Spirit of Toronto. The London Whiskey Weekender is May 10th through the 12th, and the inaugural Highland Whiskey Festival is May 10th through the 17th in Scotland. Whiskey Life Melbourne is May 10th and 11th in Australia. The Water of Life charity tasting is May 16th in New York City, and the Toulouse Whiskey Festival is May 19th in Toulouse, France. Right now, we have 213 different events on the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a tasting, festival, or any other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form at the website to let us know about it, and we'll add it to the list.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. The modern-day Michter's Distillery opened in 2015 on Louisville's west side in the suburb of Shively. Back then, Willie Pratt was the master distiller, but Pam Heilmann was waiting in the wings. She'd been hired away after years at the Jim Beam distilleries to oversee the Michter's Distillery construction, and she took over for Willie Pratt in the fall of 2016 when he retired to become Master Distiller Emeritus. Now it's Pam Heilmann's turn to add Emerita to her title. She's retiring this week and will stay on as a consultant to Michter's, while her hand-picked successor, Dan McKee, takes over. I talked with both of them after the announcement.
I always kind of had a plan in my head. When I came to work for Michter's, it was a whole new thing. And, you know, I had agreed when I started with Joe that I would stay on and I would make sure that we got up and running. Our facility was 100%. We were making quality product, and I would help staff and you know, make sure the right people were in place. Although I didn't know what my thoughts were about the whole thing. You know, when I started with Michter's, I was 58 years old. Not to throw out age numbers here, but so it's been 5 years, and I'm actually going to be turning 64. And I had decided there's a lot of things that have happened the past year, actually, personally. A lot of things personally that have happened that have kind of made me think about what I really want to be doing the next few years. I wished that I could have started with Michter's many years ago to be able to get to experience all the things that I've been able to experience. I'm somewhere where I never thought I would be, Mark. Never. In a million years. And not that I'm not enjoying every minute, I am, but I really would like to spend more time with my husband and my family. I have grandkids. My family is all in New York or Florida. And so it's very difficult to get quality time with all of them, especially the grandkids who are in Florida. My husband and I had bought a house in Florida a number of years ago, 10 years ago, with the intent that someday we would move there and that's where we would retire. And then, of course, in between that time, all of this came up. So it's just been it was a really difficult decision for me. I'm not totally going out of the fold. I'm still kind of on the team with Dan and them, obviously not as involved intimately day to day, but there for guidance and advice and, just on a limited basis, part-time, so that I can provide input to them if they need it. If they don't ask me, that's okay. I know they have ideas and things, but I have a great team that we've established there. I have no doubt that they will do an outstanding job and they will carry on doing all of the traditions and things that we've established and come up with new and exciting things as well.
And you basically brought Dan along with you for the ride, didn't you?
Well, I started in 2013 and brought Dan on board the following year when we actually started the build-out of the design we had come up with for the distillery in Shively. And Dan came on board after we started building the distillery. I realized I needed someone to help me because I couldn't do everything by myself. I couldn't be everywhere. And I needed that person that I trusted to bring to fruition all the plans that we had, design plans we had put down, and make sure that we were getting what we expected. And I knew Dan was that guy.
And Dan, you two worked together at Beam before then, right?
Yeah, we worked at the Jim Beam Booker No plant. I think Pam, around six years or so. We've worked together now over 10 together. But yeah.
Dan was a distillery operator at the Claremont plant, and when I was looking for a third shift supervisor, his name came up, and when I interviewed him, I thought he would make a great addition to our team at the Booker No plant. And so he came on board with us when I was the manager there and worked about 6 or 7 years, Dan, I think.
Yeah, right
something
in
like
there.
That, somewhere around there, at Beam. And so during that time, Dan had never finished his 4-year degree, and I encouraged him strongly to do that. He went on to do that, and he called me one day. It was in the time period when I was just about to start reaching out to him, actually, and he was telling me about how he'd finished his degree, and he was excited about that. I was really proud of him that he did that while being on night shift. I don't know if you've ever worked a night shift, but it's very difficult to work a midnight to 8 shift and have any kind of life whatsoever. But he not only did that, but he finished 2 years of college in that time, and which was amazing. And I was really proud of him. And he called, and he wanted to thank me. It was probably one of the best phone calls I've ever gotten in my career. That he called to thank me for encouraging him to do that. And at the time, I said, "Well, Dan, I'm actually looking for somebody if you're interested." And he said he would be. So I brought him over. I had talked about him with Joe prior to that, and Joe said, at the time, Joe's always been very supportive in the people that we hire. He said, "Pam, if he's good enough for you, he's good enough for me. If you think he can do what we need, and will uphold the standards that we have, he said, I'm good with whoever you pick. And so Dan came on board.
Dan, what does this mean to you to get the title?
Oh, it's an extreme honor. The bourbon industry in Kentucky and making whiskey, and as kind of Pam said, when I started as a distillery operator, I didn't envision this, and it's been a great journey. I've worked with a lot of great people at Jim Beam and learned a lot of great things over the years, and working with Pam and being mentored throughout those years also, and then to be at Michter's and for what Michter stands for, and then to have this, it's an extreme honor. I'm kind of a humble person, and it's I work with a lot of great people, but having this position, it's awesome, and I look forward to continuing what we're doing here, and only improving and doing great things here. So it's an honor and a privilege, actually.
So when do you start changing things up, or are you going to leave him the way that she left him?
Well, it's not I wouldn't say changing. It's, and as Pam mentioned, she's still part of the team, and I have a really good team in the distillery, and MacPhail, our distiller, work great with him, and it's not as changing. It's since we started distilling in here in Shively in August of 2015. It's been a journey itself, and so we're always looking like, hey, what can we do better to improve that quality? And that's one great thing working with Michter's. It's not just volume; it's the quality of the product. So that's a lot of the things that we're doing, and making sure that we have the consistency in the product and so forth. So, given that all of our products are either truly small batch with 20 full barrels or single barrel, we have to make sure we're putting great distillate into those barrels. So I wouldn't say change. It's just continuing and also improving as we do it.
When do we start seeing some of that whiskey that you first laid down in 2015 in a bottle, since it's almost 4 years now?
Oh, what do you think, Pam? Typically our US 1 line is 5 to 7 years. And
right.
That's another great thing of, being privately held, and that we're releasing to a taste profile and not the age statement. So we have some time to make sure that everything is aging accordingly.
Exactly.
It could be late 2020 or into 2021. Maybe you'll could see some transition, but again, we don't want to do it until we're right. So it's not like we have a set date for that to happen.
We're going to make sure that the continuity is there, and that it's a very smooth transition. Same recipes, same yeast, so people should not even see much of a change at all.
Now, there's one final release coming out in the next couple of weeks here that is your last one, Pam. Tell me about it.
It's a 10-year product. Normally, we do a 10-year twice a year, spring and fall, generally, if we have the product to bottle and it's ready. But this product will be coming out, I think, mid-May, Dan, is it? I don't know the date exactly.
Yeah, I don't have it. It's soon. It'll be coming up here shortly.
Yeah, and you're going to see it's going to be the same thing that you can expect from all of our 10-year products. They're not always exactly 10 years. This one is not exactly 10 years. Most of them are a little more than 10. We've had as much as 17 in a 10-year release. It's all based on taste profile, as Dan mentioned earlier.
So, Dan, what's your background? Before you went to Beam, what were you doing in the industry?
Well, actually, prior, it's been a little over 13 years now. Prior to joining Jim Beam as a distillery operator, I actually was a foreman for a large company doing construction, commercial flat roofing, where they did, large projects and so forth. So I was a foreman for the company and ran work. And I have a very good friend down here, Nathan Crosley, and he that had worked at Jim Beam, and so we always kept in touch. And I found out about some, openings, and eventually was able to join the team at Jim Beam. And so I've been in the distillery. I worked at, as Pam mentioned, the Claremont and the Booker No for a total of 9 years as operator or distillery supervisor before I got the opportunity to come to Michter's as a distillery manager. And then, when Willie Pratt, our Master Distiller, now Emeritus, retired, moved to Distiller. And then now with this opportunity with Pam retiring, I've moved up. So it's been a very exciting journey, maybe not as long as others, but I'm like I mentioned earlier, I'm very fortunate because being at the largest distillery, and you see a lot of things, and again you're exposed to a lot of people with a lot of knowledge. Again, very fortunate to have worked with them, and then work with Pam and many others. Again, Willie Pratt here and Andrea Wilson. So it's again, it goes back to it's been pretty exciting being in this industry.
I just wanted to point out that kind of we talked about a little before, but when I first joined Michter's, there were only 5 of us on the team, not including Joe, of course, just the people here at Louisville. And we now have a staff of, I think it's 35 at the Shively plant.
Actually, I think 37
is that right,
now.
Dan?
I think 37 now, yeah.
Okay, we're getting more and more people every day. But that being said, the key people like Dan, MacPhail, Andrea, all of the people that we have in key positions, Kyle, who is our R&D director, we had a succession plan. We did a lot of planning. We did a lot of team meetings. Our senior staff, which included Andrea, myself, Joe, of course, and Chris Sears, who is our CFO, we sit down and we had discussions from day one on, okay, how is this going to look in the future? What kind of key people do we need to have in place? So we're set up for this and set up for future succession planning. We have key people. We have a lot of younger people in our pipeline who are very, very, very smart and very sharp, very highly educated, and they're all in the learning curve in different places in their careers. So we kind of have planned for things like this. So it wasn't like it was a surprise to anyone. We talk about this stuff going forward. Everyone knew that I was not going to be like Jimmy Russell. I'm not going to be there when I'm, very, very old, because I have other things in my plan, and that was my family. So, that was kind of all part of it.
So, Dan, you can fix the rick house roof if you have to, right?
Well, I always tell them I'm retired, but when they do need assistance, I did that for a while, and again, it was like high-profile projects, and all kinds of things like that. So they do tease me about that, and prior to all of that, I have an associate's in criminal justice, and then that's where, Pam always was like, "Don't you want to go back to school?" And so when I came into work one night at midnight, I had this newspaper article on my desk with this program at Indiana Wesleyan and University, and so it was kind of, okay, I need to do this. So it's been it's been interesting because, again, but once I started and I actually hands-on production of making whiskey and so forth, I fell in love with it. I love doing this, and I love the production side of it. I love, not only the final product, what it takes to get there, whether it's making sure everything, the utilities, the equipment, the scheduling, and the raw materials coming in, working with the grains and so forth, and then having, working with operators, and I think Pam will agree, like teaching, and also I learn every day too, and by talking to other people with vast amount of knowledge, you never stop learning, and that's what I love about this.
That's one of the things I love about Dan, is that it doesn't matter what the subject, he's going to become an expert at it. He will seek out information wherever he has to, whether it be the internet, from books, from other people with experience. He will reach out and pull whatever knowledge he needs to make an informed decision. I've always admired that about Dan. He can become an expert in topics that, at one point may not have known as much about. He is very, very proactive and wanting to make the right decisions, for the right reasons.
And I'll say, Mark, and Pam mentioned it, Joe, and and when Pam and Andrea and everybody was establishing the team here, I mean, we have a lot of great talent. I mean, with chemical engineers, chemists, and people from other distilleries with over 20 years experience. I mean, there's just been a great team established here. So I mean, there's a lot of resources to have here, and that's what's great too. It's not just one person.
Right, it's the entire team.
Yeah,
we've assembled a really, really great team. Yeah,
whether it's warehousing, we have people with over 20 years experience there. Bottling, we have people with I'm not sure, Greg, but I think 20. It's like 20 some years experience. So it's there's a lot of great things happening in each department here.
Thanks to Pam Heilmann and Dan McKee for spending some time with us on WhiskyCast In-Depth, and we wish Pam all the best in her retirement. WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. The final season of Game of Thrones is here at last. Look for the House Lannister Lagavulin 9-year-old at a whiskey shop near you. It's just one of 8 whiskeys in the Game of Thrones single malt Scotch whiskey collection from Diageo and HBO. Check out the entire range at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the most recent release from Michter's, the April 2019 release of its US1 Barrel Strength Rye. This single-barrel bottling is their first barrel-strength rye release since 2016, and my sample is bottled at 54.9% ABV. The nose is spicy and aromatic with baking spices, dark chocolate, molasses, pipe tobacco, and a hint of black cherries. The taste is thick, chewy, and spicy with black pepper, clove, and chili powder notes, balanced nicely by touches of honey, molasses, and black cherries underneath. The finish is long and slightly sweet with lingering spices, molasses, and black cherries. I'm scoring the 2019 release of Michter's US1 Barrel Strength Rye a 91. Now let's look at another rye, Whistle Pig's new 6-year-old Piggyback Rye. This one is bottled at 48.2% ABV. The nose has notes of dill, charred oak, herbs, muted spices, and just a hint of honey. The taste is spicy with clove, cinnamon, allspice, a hint of dill, honey, and dark chocolate. And the finish is long with subtle spices. I'm scoring Whistle Pig's Piggyback a 91. Let's turn to bourbons now. We mentioned Kentucky Owl's new confiscated bourbon last time around. It's a sourced Kentucky straight bourbon bottled at 48.2% ABV. The nose has notes of honey, butterscotch, touches of spices, and just a hint of charred oak. The taste has a good spicy kick of black pepper, along with allspice, ginger root, honey, and butterscotch. The finish has long-lasting spices and just a hint of honey. I'm scoring Kentucky Owl's Confiscated Bourbon a 92. Let's look now at the Fusion Series No. 1 from the Bardstown Bourbon Company. As we heard earlier, it's a blend of the distillery's own 2-year-old rye and wheated bourbons with 11-year-old sourced bourbon. The nose has notes of nuts, caramel, dried fruits, muted spices, and touches of honey and vanilla. The taste has a nice balance of fruitiness and spices with orange peel, apples, baking spices, and hints of nuts, vanilla, and honey in the background. The finish has good lingering touches of fruits and spices, and I'm scoring the Bardstown Bourbon Company's Fusion Series No. 1 a 92. We'll wrap it up with the Pfeiffer Pavitt Reserve Bourbon from Bardstown Bourbon Company. Once again, it's a 9-year-old Tennessee bourbon that's finished in Cabernet Sauvignon casks from California's Pfeiffer Pavitt Winery. It's bottled at 49.45% ABV, and the nose has notes of fresh berries, dark fruits, soft spices, and a hint of cocoa powder. The taste is fruity with berries and dark fruits, balanced by baking spices, oak tannins, and a hint of red grapes. The finish is long and fruity with hints of spice. And I'm scoring the Pfeiffer Pavitt Reserve Bourbon from the Bardstown Bourbon Company a 93. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. You'll find it at WhiskyCast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice, presented by Lot 40. Last time around, I mentioned after our interview with Gordon Bruce of Tamdhu Distillery that Tamdhu and Macduff are the two distilleries that bottle their single malts under a different brand name. Of course, within 24 hours, someone else pointed out one more. At Boskert Karasu tweeted the third one. It's Glenlivet Distillery in Campbellton, which is owned by Springbank Distillers. Its whiskies are sold under the Kilkerran brand name because another company owns the rights to the Glengyle brand name. Thanks, Bozzy. Just a bit of positive feedback from Dave Lee, the podcaster behind the Waves of Tech podcast. He's also the founder of International Podcast Day. He tweeted this: I just discovered that I love Scotch whiskey. I subscribed to your podcast to learn more about the industry. Dave. Thanks, Dave, and welcome to the community. By the way, in case you need a reason to celebrate on September 30th, that is International Podcast Day. The folks at Pittsburgh's Wiggle Distillery had an indoor axe throwing event the other night, and they sent out a tweet to promote it. I was joking when I retweeted it with the comment, whiskey tasting and indoor axe throwing. What could possibly go wrong? Well, in addition to some folks sending around that gif of the woman trying to throw an axe only to have to duck really fast when it bounced right back at her head, we got this tweet from @Stu Loosemore. What could possibly go wrong? Answer: drams get spilled and someone then deserves to get axed from the event. You can't see me, but I'm shaking my head right now. If you have a bad joke, pun, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us online. Look for us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Behind the Label is our look at the history, science, and other stuff that all make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. And we'll go back to the inbox for this one. James J. O'Toole emailed us this week. Hi, I'm a member of the Ancient Order of Hibernians on Long Island, New York, and we were looking into starting a whiskey group. I was looking to find out what are the requirements to start and maintain a group. Well, there really are no requirements other than that everyone in the group be of legal drinking age and that you obey all of your local liquor laws. Other than that, you can make your whiskey club or group as formal or informal as you'd like. But I had the chance to get some expert advice on this. André Girard is one of the founders of the Quebec Whiskey Club in Quebec City, Canada. The club celebrated its 10th anniversary last year.
Tell me how the club founded.
Well, that's a good whiskey story. So a couple of friends who like whiskey, share a few drams a couple times per month, and we both bring a couple bottles and share with other whiskey fans, blind tasting, taking notes. And one night I had a bad idea and said, why not starting a whiskey club? There should be other whiskey fans somewhere in Quebec City. So then we started a whiskey club, and the first year we make it very well, about 80 members, and it grows like boom. 10 years later, that's a huge whiskey club.
How huge? What's the number?
We actually have about 175 members and a waiting list of about 650. So for a city, Quebec City is 800,000, so it's not a big city, but a lot of whiskey fans in such a small city.
You could take that waiting list and create 3 more clubs out of it easily.
Well, that's the reason we start, giving tastings in pubs and trainings. That's a good, way to keep people involved and related to the whiskey, love. Though, so whiskey pubs and trainings and that kind of event, because we don't want to grow that big and have 1,000 members. That's not the deal. Kind of not a private, but small whiskey club.
After that, it becomes more of an organization than a club, right?
That's it. And as it grows, we don't want to lose the friendship within a small whiskey club. Even with 175, we still have a couple tastings a month by 40 or 80. So we manage to have a full tasting each month. And if all the places were not sold, we open to the public. So and at the end of each year, we look at the people who came at the tasting were not members, and if they come twice, 3, 4 times a year, they will be invited to join the club the next year.
They skip the waiting list?
That's that kind of stuff. Yeah.
What's the longest somebody's been on that waiting list to get in and hasn't gotten in yet?
Oh, I know some people are waiting for 5-6 years. Yeah. And strangely, we still have about 10% of actual members who will live the year after. So I know we change, and maybe we don't want to be involved in so much tasting. So I understand that. So for myself, I change over the years. So each year we have about 15, 20 new members. So keep rolling. That's a good thing.
Explain the passion for whiskey in Quebec City and in Quebec in general, because you live in a province where the government controls all the whiskey sales, and they don't have the greatest selection in the world. How did this develop?
I think, to be honest, it's all related. Have you ever been to Quebec City?
I've been to Montreal several times, but not Quebec City.
Okay, to give you an idea, right now, when I left the home yesterday, there was about 14 feet of snow in front of the house. So, so you need whiskey to get rid of the winter. That's, I think that's part of the, the whiskey passion. So, and so, as you may imagine, most of the people, they really love, strong whiskeys and peaty whiskeys, and women in the club, they really love strong cask strength whiskey, and so that's it. And in regards to the ACQ, when we started about 15 years ago, there was not so much whiskey on the shelf. They're doing well. It's governmentally owned, but we deal with it. It's better than the past years.
It's better than Ontario, too, right?
It's kind of related because that's the same, way of dealing with whiskey liquor board. So, it's I think a little bit better.
How much competition is there among club members to come up with the obscure whiskeys for your tastings?
The thing is, one thing with the whiskey club is a lot of members traveling around the world, and instead of keeping the bottle for themselves, they share with the whiskey club members. That's the whiskey community is all about. So we don't deal with those kind of things. There's always a whiskey collector somewhere, but whiskey passion is sharing. You can have the best bottle in your hand, but if you're alone, that doesn't mean anything. So the thrill is to share the bottle with friends and whiskey lovers. So, and this is something very strong within the whiskey club in Quebec City.
What's the best advice you could give to somebody who's forming a whiskey club now? Because I get emails occasionally from people looking for advice on how to form a club. And what would you tell them to do?
Strangely, I give the same advice I had from Marc Laverdiere. That's one of the best brand ambassadors I ever met. And Marc introduced me to Highland Park and Whiskey Love. And the first time we met, I stand in front of the table, Highland Park table, and go on my knees and say, "Oh, that's my favorite distillery." That's how we met. And he said, "You want to start the whiskey club? Start, as a small thing." And never grow too much, and don't go too big. That's it. That's strange because we're such in some way a big whiskey club, but it's a small community in itself. So, and have different members. You must have very experienced members, but some newbie too, because they have different passion in whiskey, and it keeps really a whiskey club alive in some way. So that's my advice.
There's a link for the Quebec Whiskey Club in our show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. That's also where we have a page devoted to whiskey clubs around the world. If you have a whiskey club and you'd like us to add your club's website, Twitter handle, or Facebook group to the page, just use the contact form on the website to let us know. And James, I hope we've answered your question. Good luck in getting your whiskey group together. Now, you can use that same contact form to get in touch with us if there's something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for all of the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast, the latest whiskey news, events, the whiskey photo of the week, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes. We'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast or by email. The address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is produced by Cask Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.